Well, I got into this appointment. There was no paperwork to fill out. I checked in, and within like 2 minutes, they called me back into the office. And I sat down, and I'm expecting to wait wait a little bit longer. But within another 30 seconds, the doctor walks in, and he sits down in front of me, and he says, "Bobby, you have cancer." And I was like, "What?" I mean, say that again. My jaw hit the desk. I couldn't believe what he said.
Welcome to the Radical Health Rebel podcast. I'm your host, Leigh Brandon. This work started for me several decades ago when I started to see the impact I could make on people, helping them to identify the root cause of their health problems that no doctor could figure out, including serious back, knee, shoulder and neck injuries, acne and eczema issues, severe gut health problems, even helping couples get pregnant after several IVF treatments had failed. And it really moves me to be able to help people in this way. And that is why I do what I do and why we have this show. In this week's episode, I spoke with financial expert Bob DePasquale, aka the Generosity Guy. When I first spoke with Bob, I knew I had to share his story of two severely traumatic events on September the 10th and then September the 11th, 2001 in New York, and an act of generosity he received that not only helped him stay alive, but led to an epidemic of generosity, giving back, and doing good in the world. In this episode, Bob explains how to model giving back, why a giving mindset improves your health and wellness, and we also discuss modern philanthropy and the financial future. Enjoy. Bob DePasquale, welcome to the Radical Health Rebel podcast. Thanks for coming on the show.
Leigh, thank you for having me, man. I'm excited to be here.
It's a real pleasure. And I think we first spoke last year now. So it's really great to finally have this opportunity to share your message with the world.
No, I'm pumped, man. Anytime I have an opportunity to talk with people, especially when you're all across the world, I mean, technology just gets me excited. So I'm excited to be here. So thanks for giving me the platform, man.
No, it's really great to, I'm really looking forward to hearing what you've got to share with us today. So today's episode is entitled Radical Generosity with Bob DePasquale. And as I alluded to in episode 1 of the podcast, your finances affect your health, and poverty is the biggest risk factor for poor health and the number one killer on the planet. So I've been looking for some time to have someone on the show to discuss financial matters. And the first time I spoke with Bob, I knew he was the right man for the job because he's so much more than a finance expert, and his own values around money align so well with the values of the podcast. And I know you're going to love hearing what Bob has to share with you today. So Bob, to kick things off, would you share with the audience a little bit about you, perhaps your upbringing, your educational background, and your career to date so the audience get a good feel for who you are?
Absolutely. So I call myself the Generosity Guy, and that's not because I want to be self-promotional per se, but generosity changed and truly saved my life at a young age. And so anytime someone asks me this question, I take the opportunity to explain to them why I do what I do. And we can talk in depth about what it is I do professionally and how I speak with organizations about generosity. But there's a big reason why I do this. And I was born in New York. You mentioned about my upbringing. And I moved to South Florida, where I still live this day, when I was 3 years old. And outside of college, I lived in South Florida my whole life in those first few years. Well, interestingly enough, when I went off to college, I moved back to New York from South Florida. I said, you know what? I want to take an opportunity to spread my wings a little bit. I'm 18 years old. I'm going to go off to college. I had an opportunity to play football, American football, if you will, Leigh, although Aussie rules football is pretty interesting. So I've seen that before too. But and I was going to get a little bit closer to my family because they were all still from up in New York. And somewhere on there was academics. I was going to study, and I was going to go to school too. I'm sure my parents probably would have liked to think it was number one on the list, but if I'm being honest, it was somewhere a little bit lower. But I went off to college thinking I was invincible. I don't know about you, Leigh, or anyone else out there listening, but when you're 18, you have this feeling of invincibility. I don't know. Did you have that? Did you ever feel that when you were younger?
Oh, for sure.
Yeah. We all think we're indestructible at that point. So I went off to college, and it was the middle of the summer. So for us, and I went up there in September. No, excuse me. I think it was August at this point. And I'm in there for training camp. So for football. So it's going to last probably a month long. And my first ever college training camp, I was up there to prove myself to my new coaches and my teammates, maybe make some friends, and really just be up there for a month getting acclimated to New York and Long Island before classes started. And early on in training camp, they're working us really hard. I mean, you're practicing twice a day. This is before they change the rules. It's really hot out. It's a strenuous few weeks that you're in, and that's part of the deal. It's supposed to be hard so they can train you. Well, I thought I was playing pretty well. In fact, some of my coaches had given me some positive feedback early on the first couple of days of practice. And then I remember pulling a muscle. I thought I had pulled my groin. Now, I don't know if you've ever pulled a groin muscle. Have you ever hurt yourself there, tweaked that muscle before?
Yeah.
It is incredibly debilitating. Thank God I haven't really done this since. But I mean, you can't stand, you can't twist around, sit down, lay down, forget running or playing a sport. If you have a pretty seriously pulled groin muscle, you can't do that. So I was debilitated, and I would do these rehab exercises every morning in the training room. So, and this is a college university setting. So it's way bigger than a couple student volunteers and maybe one trainer like you would have in high school. I mean, there's hundreds of people, or, probably about 100 people on any given morning during training camp getting ready for practice at like 5:30, 6 o'clock in the morning. And part of my rehab exercise was I would sit on this 3-wheeled stool and I would shimmy across the room. I guess it was to strengthen the muscles in your groin and hip. I don't even really know what it was supposed to do, but it was extremely challenging. And people would give me a hard time about it. Like, what are you doing? And finally, our head trainer, Rick, who was all of maybe 5'6", 140 pounds, maybe soaking wet. And he stood up on this box, and he would always do this to get people's attention. And it seemed like on this day, now I'm not going to exaggerate anything in this story except for maybe this point here. It just seemed like it got dead silent and all the commotion going on, but it was quiet. And he yells across the room, he cups his hands and he says, "Bobby, you need to get back out on the field. Quit acting like a weakling." And I mean, what a shot to my ego. I was no longer that invincible 18-year-old. I looked like such a loser in front of coaches, teammates, and other trainers. And I met with him a little bit later, and I said, "Rick, I mean, seriously, this is not getting any better. I want to be back out on the field, but I can't move." So he's like, "All right, I'm going to send you to a doctor." And come to find out, some of my teammates, when I told them I had this private meeting with Rick, they're like, "You had a private meeting with the guy?" Like, no one ever met with Rick privately. So they knew something was wrong. But I went to these doctor's appointments. Now I'm 18. I'm thousands of miles from home. I'm in New York, driving around to these doctor's appointments as technically an adult because I'm 18. But I mean, I didn't know, I barely knew how to make a sandwich. No less drive around and go to these doctor's appointments. And I would fill out this paperwork. It would take me like an hour just to get even into the appointment because I had to answer all these questions about medical history and insurance, stuff that I had no clue about. And these appointments would take forever because they would run all these tests on me. I mean, CAT scans, sonograms, MRIs, ultrasound, you name it. Every test in the book I had over a series of a week or two. And I remember I had one more appointment scheduled. And by this time, a couple of weeks had gone by, my parents were planning to come up for my first ever college game. Now, we knew I wasn't playing in the game at this point because a couple of weeks had gone by and I wasn't getting any better. But their flight was scheduled for the same morning that this other test was, or this other doctor's appointment. So I went into the doctor expecting my parents to maybe leave me a message, or I'd come out of the appointment and try to get a hold of them, see what was happening. Well, I got into this appointment. There was no paperwork to fill out. I checked in, and within like 2 minutes, they called me back into the office, and I sat down, and I'm expecting to wait a little bit longer. But within another 30 seconds, the doctor walks in, and he sits down in front of me, and he says, "Bobby, you have cancer." And I was like, "What?" I mean, say that again. My jaw hit the desk. I mean, I couldn't believe what he said. I was so blown away, dead silent. And he goes, I know you probably don't even believe what I just said. And we'll find an oncologist for you, but you can go. And I thought to myself, I probably even said this to him. I was like, I don't even know what an oncologist is. Like, I have cancer. What's going on? And so I was in shock, and I walked out of the office. And when I got out of the building, I mean, it was like the perfect divine timing. My phone rang, and it was my mom. And she said, hey, we landed. I wasn't expecting you to pick up the phone. I thought you'd be in a doctor's appointment, but I just want to let you know we're here. How did the appointment go? And I was like, about that appointment, Mom. And I had to tell her what the doctor told me. And, Leigh, it was almost as if she was screaming, but it was dead silent. I mean, she didn't say a word. And I could just tell that, the emotion that she felt. And the only thing I remember hearing was my dad saying, Susan, what's wrong? Now, he was in the car also, and he knew something was wrong. He could just tell by her reaction. And so we ended up meeting at my uncle's house, who still lives in New York and lived there at that time too. And I hadn't seen my parents in like a month. This is the longest I had ever been away from home. And I give my parents a big hug, and we kind of looked at each other like, what's going on? So we shed some tears and said some prayers and just had to kind of figure out what was going on in life. So a couple of days passed, and now it was Saturday. So that was a Thursday. And Saturday was supposed to be my first ever game. And like I said, I wasn't playing in the game, but I'll never forget this. My uncle's best friend, who we didn't know, because remember, we lived in Florida, comes over the house, and we never met the guy before. And he walks right up to my parents, and he knows them by name. It says, here, Bob and Susan, here's my keys. Take my car. You can use it for whatever you need. I can't imagine what you're going through with your family right now and your son. And they were blown away. They reluctantly took his keys. And he said goodbye to my uncle and my aunt and me. And he was there for maybe 15 minutes, and he left. And that was it. And his name was Tim, my uncle's best friend. And we're like, wow, that's the most generous thing that someone's ever done for our family. And so that was Saturday. I'll never forget watching the game. A couple of days go by. Now, we did speak with an oncologist, and he told me not to drop out of all of my classes, especially if we were going to get treated in New York. And we wanted to stay up there because we felt like the best doctors would be up there. So my first ever college class was on Monday. Went to some more doctor's appointments after that. Got up on Tuesday, do the same exact thing. Went to my second ever college class. Drove there with Tim's car. Thank you, Tim. And I came out of the class and I was hungry. So I went to the cafeteria to grab something to eat. And I was eating a breakfast burrito sitting there at this little bar type of table there. And there was one of those tube televisions, like before, like a flat screen, like this one behind me, like an old school television. It's hanging from a bracket in the corner of the ceiling and the wall. And it's like, might be 8 inches. So I'm almost squinting to watch this TV, but it's the news. Now, I don't know the news station. I don't live in New York. So I'm just watching whatever's on, right? And I'm sitting there, and all of a sudden, there's a plane that flies into one of the Twin Towers in downtown Manhattan, which is not too far from where my school was. And I was like, wow. I called my dad, and I said, Dad, are you watching this? A plane just hit one of the towers there in New York. And I'm like, what a horrible accident. And he's like, yeah, I'm watching this. And we're talking for maybe a minute or whatever. And all of a sudden, bam, a second plane hits the other Twin Tower in the World Trade Center there in New York City. And my dad was like, Bobby, this is not an accident anymore. You better get in the car and get back to your uncle's house now. Something's going on. We're getting attacked. So this was the September 11th, 2001, and the terrorist attacks were going on. And I hopped in the car. I didn't even finish the burrito. It's probably still sitting there 20 something years later. And I'll never forget this. It's a 15-minute drive from my school to my uncle's house. But Leigh, it took me 9 hours to drive that. So the whole day I was in the car and I was listening to AM radio. Now, I subsequently have a master's degree in broadcast journalism. I actually love radio, worked in it, but I will never, ever listen to 9 straight hours of AM radio ever again in my life. But it was riveting. And I'm driving and there's burning towers in the distance, smoke and fire. And I'm listening to this. And I pulled into my uncle's neighborhood and I ran out of gas. I mean, if it would have been less than a mile before that, I'd have been on the highway. I don't know what I would have done. But we pushed my car into my uncle's driveway. And we're all looking at each other like, wow. So a few days ago, I'm not even sure if my life is over. And now we're wondering if the world is over. And we're looking at each other this crazy. My aunt was hysterical because she knew that my uncle was on business the night before. Now, he happened to be in Denver, but we didn't know where these planes were coming from at the time. So we were concerned that he was on one of those planes. And finally, 8 p.m. or so, the phone rings. My aunt picks it up, and it's my uncle. Praise the Lord. He's safe. He says, guys, you've probably been frantic. I'm sorry. I've been trying to get through, but the phones have been down. I'm stuck in Denver. I'm okay. I'll try to catch a flight home tomorrow. And we were ready to hang up with him. And he said, but I got to tell you one more thing. My best friend, Tim, who you just met a few days ago, he was in the towers this morning and he died.
Wow.
And we just dead silence, kind of looking at each other like, wow, what are the chances? So subsequently, we learned a little bit more about Tim, and his last name was O'Brien. He was an employee, one of the higher ups in the banking firm, investment bank, Cantor Fitzgerald, that still has their business today. And if you really want to learn more about the whole situation, I'm sure there's a YouTube video out there about their president at the time talking about how he lost everyone that morning. And there were hundreds of people that worked for Cantor Fitzgerald in the tower, and they all died there. And come to find out, Cantor Fitzgerald themselves, but also Tim specifically, were very, very generous people. They had a very generous culture there. And Tim was known for being a giving person. And the fact that he gave us his car to us was, we were, like I said, we were blown away. But come to find out, that probably wasn't that out of the ordinary for him. He was known for doing things that people would call radically generous. And he would say, I'll always take an opportunity to be generous because I'll never know when my last opportunity will be.
Wow.
And Cantor Fitzgerald themselves gave office space for free to my uncle's foundation for cystic fibrosis, which is a disease my cousin has. And it's interesting to note that no one from the foundation would be in the office that early in the morning. Thank God. So no one from the foundation died. But there's one lady, Tammy, who would typically be in around that time, or she would have passed away, but she got stuck in the subway and she was uncharacteristically late that morning and ended up experiencing the whole thing and surviving. And she looks at, she thinks about her own situation, and she doesn't know why that she, for whatever reason that morning, she was late. And it just, it goes to show me, or to show us, that we don't really know what timing is for us, and our opportunities to be generous could be extremely limited. So I learned that lesson from Tim, and I think about it every day now. And so you asked, what do I do, or what's my story? And it doesn't really matter where I was educated or where I grew up or my family situation. And I could be more than willing to talk about all those things. But the key moment in time in my life was that period of a few days where I thought at one point I wouldn't be alive. Then I learned that we were getting attacked senselessly, and to come to find out that that generosity really saved my life. There's a whole bunch of other things that happened during that period of time that I ended up getting treated and finding the right things and surviving 9/11 and doing all of that, put it together. That from that point on, now I wasn't always good. It took me a while to figure it all out, but I knew from that point on that I would try to have a generous mindset and a generous heart, and so that's what drives me to this day.
Wow, it's an amazing story. And I guess what I would like to know is, once you got back to your uncle's house on 9/11, was it the day before you were told you had cancer? And then you see two aeroplanes hit the Twin Towers. How was you feeling?
I thought the world was coming to an end. I didn't know what to think. It was all kind of a blur. As I mentioned, I went from this invincible 18-year-old to a very, very vulnerable adolescent, all in just a couple days. It was tough.
I mean, I was working in London. No, hang on. Where was I? Oh no, I'm getting confused with 7/7. I'm trying to remember where I was 9/11, but I remember seeing. Because I don't watch the news. I haven't watched the news for a very, very long time, pretty much my whole adult life. And I remember for some reason I was watching the news. I think I was at home. I think I had the day off. And, even being that far away and seeing what was happening was pretty scary, right? Because, it's the unknown. But to have been in your position, to have been diagnosed with cancer the day before, and then to have witnessed that and to be so close to it must have been pretty terrifying.
It was one of those things. I tell people this all the time. I would never wish what I went through on anyone. And so I like to stress that. But I'd be lying if I don't think about it, that period of time in my life, about it. I mean, literally every day. It's not even, like I said, I don't exaggerate anything. Every day I think about that time of my life. And sure, I wouldn't want to go through the treatments and the pain and the emotional issues, but it really has shaped my thought process. So I wouldn't change the lessons for the world.
Yeah. So obviously we're getting the message that was where, if you like, you was introduced to radical generosity. But what happened next?
Well, it took 4 or 5 months or so for me to be healed physically. I got treatment, had surgery. If you haven't been able to figure out, the type of cancer I had was testicular because it was in my groin. And it had spread up to my abdomen. So there were some scary times there. There's some funny stories too, but it was a challenging time. But I was healed. I had very, very aggressive treatments. My oncologist told me that it was an extremely aggressive form of cancer, and we're lucky we found it then, or else it would have been a very short period of time. I could have been gone, but it was also extremely curable, which was nice to know. And so a spring semester came, and I was healthy enough to get back out on the field and go to school full time. But it really took me, probably a full year to mentally kind of process all that. I mean, it was all just a blur. And then, but the emotional healing took about a couple of years. So I always, it went by really fast. The 2 years really went by really fast. The period of time seemed like forever and really slow, that 3 or 4 months there. But the next couple of years went by really fast, and it kind of hit me when I was a junior about exactly what happened and how I could really make more of a positive impact in the world, even as a junior in college without any real direction in his life at that point.
So it sounds like what you're saying is that series of events almost took you from a position of, invincibility to actually realizing, we've got a finite length of time on this planet. I better do something important with it.
Absolutely. And, people will tell me, was it a change? And, you have this crazy story, Bob, and I don't have a tragic story like that. And it's not, I didn't change immediately. It wasn't all of a sudden, bam, I'm the generosity guy, or I have a purpose in life. It took that to knock me off my high horse of invincibility. And then since then, I've been climbing back up. I don't think I've reached it. I don't know if I don't think life is truly about reaching perfection. I don't think we're not perfect. We're human. So that knocked me down, and I've been getting up slowly since then. And I think that's what it's all about. So the transformation is 20 years in the making. It was that one event, though, that got it started.
Yeah, that was the spark.
Yes.
Yeah. So how many years did you do at college?
4 years. So even though I only took 2 classes that first semester, because of my athletic schedule and taking classes in the summers, I ended up making up the credits that I needed to. And I ended up graduating those 4 years. And I still had eligibility to play sports, and I wanted to. I was considering it, but I found a master's program in broadcast journalism that I alluded to earlier. And I ended up moving back home to Florida, and I went to the University of Miami for grad school. It was too cold in New York, to be honest with you. So I hung up the cleats, I hung up the boots and the gloves and, all the cold weather gear. And I went back home, studied broadcasting for about a year, got my master's, and haven't really wanted to go back to school. Well, I shouldn't say that. I've done some professional education, some other things, but I finished school pretty quickly.
Okay, so you done your master's. What was next?
As soon as I completed my master's, I mentioned also earlier that I worked in radio for a little while, and I loved it. I loved the communication. I love this type of stuff, interviewing, talking to people, asking questions, answering questions. This is right up my alley. And I got recruited out of the industry, though. There were some questionable acts going on and the way they were treating customers and advertisers and some money practices that I didn't really like. And I put off the recruiter for a while, but ended up calling him back. He was totally surprised. And I took a job with a financial organization. And I worked there for 12, almost 13 years and cut my teeth in the industry, learned all about personal finance, learned about professional finance, learn about philanthropy and giving and taxes and all these different strategies to help people live out a fulfilled life. And a couple of years ago, my business partner and I, who was just a colleague at the time, had this crazy idea that, it was really my idea, and she agreed. I was surprised when I told her, and she was pumped, and we decided to open our own company. We didn't want to leave our previous employer. We love working there. We love the mission of the organization. But people were asking us to go a little bit deeper with them on some of their concerns financially and specifically with their philanthropy and their giving. And you know me, I'm into generosity, and I wanted to help people do this. And it's not just about the money. They were asking us to help them look for organizations to volunteer at, or how do they start their own organization, or can we manage more of their finances so they have more time to dedicate to meaningful causes in the world. And we just could not do that in that business model. So nothing against my former employer, still communicate with a lot of the people there. But the only opportunity we had to chase after this dream of helping people live out their generosity more was to open our own firm. And so what better time than during a pandemic to start a business? And we took a big leap of faith. We gave up a lot, but it was for way more gain in the long run. And so we did that. And now I manage what's over here in the States, what's called an RIA, a registered investment advisor. And we manage people's financial and business lives so that they can free up time and devote more resources to making a positive impact in the world. And so it's really wealth management with a focus on generosity.
Mm. Yeah, it's really interesting that, and I've discussed this on previous episodes, but, you can get people in life and, they can build financial wealth. They can climb the corporate ladder, and the saying is they can get to the top of the ladder and realize it's against the wrong wall. Right.
Yep. Absolutely.
Because,
Absolutely.
that they haven't kind of set their own goals themselves, really. They haven't got their own purpose. But one of the things that I think we also see in the world is that there's plenty of people that have lots of money. But what we tend to see is that some people get lost in that. And what I mean by that is they still don't have a purpose. And, you hear a lot of, actors and rock stars and people like that committing suicide, following depression and drug addiction, things like that. But what seems to be the one thing that seems to prevent that is giving back.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And, that's exactly what you're talking about. Generosity. You're talking about giving back. You're helping others. Right.
100%.
So I think this is a really, really important subject. And as I alluded to earlier, the reason why I'm so keen to talk about finances on a health podcast is because if you don't have any money, it's very difficult to be healthy, right?
Mm-hmm.
And, if you look around the world, who's the most unhealthy people generally in the world? Okay, there are caveats to that, but you look at the poorest people in the world, they are the unhealthiest. They're malnourished. They don't have, running water. They don't have access to abundant, healthy food. Okay, you've got the other end of the spectrum, countries like the US and the UK who, have got too much food, but too much of the wrong food as well, right?
Mm-hmm.
But people that are very, very poor don't have the option to be healthy. If you live in the US, the UK, Europe, Australia, New Zealand, Canada, etc., you've got a choice. You can choose whether you be healthy or you can choose to not be healthy. And that's what we call freedom. But, there are some places in Asia and Africa, South America, for instance, there is no choice because of the level of poverty. And that's why I think finances is so important when it comes to health. And I think it's great what you're doing. I'm going to come and talk about that a bit more, is that what you're helping to do is help those that don't have that option. You're giving them a little bit of a hand up so that they do have those choices.
Exactly. And I want to double down on one thing that you said earlier. You talked about people that don't have their own goals. And if you're listening out there watching, you have goals. We all have goals. The question is have you taken the time to develop your own? And I fear that a lot of people, whether it's related to health and fitness or money or personal life, spirituality, whatever it is, a lot of us have goals. And I'm guilty of it too. This is not me. Once again, my journey has been 20-something years in the making now, climbing up from when I got knocked off the horse. But we all have these goals that society tells us that we have to have. And it's because of, I love digital technology. I wrote a book about it, how to use it for positive. But the default is to use it for not so good things. And we're constantly told about what we need more of and self-development and how we need to be better here and do all these other things. And I really fear that it gives us these goals that are not our own. We don't own them. And so we don't have the passion to chase after the goals that aren't actually ours. And even if we do reach them, it's not fulfilling because it's not the stuff that we were totally interested in. And you got to really, really be careful, because if there other people's goals are telling you need more of stuff, in the back of your mind, whether you realize it or not, you're subconsciously telling yourself that you're not good enough. And that's not the case at all. In fact, I found some of the people that have the most modest livings, they have the lowest income, the lowest net worth, they're the most generous people, the most fulfilled and mentally healthy people in the world, because they are giving back. So absolutely what you're saying, Leigh, is so important. It's not about the volume. It's certainly not about the amount of money all the time. I mean, and don't get me wrong, money is a very, very powerful tool in our world and we need it, but it's just a tool. It's not the answer.
Yeah, absolutely. Just want to change tack a little bit. Now, for those that are watching this, they should be able to see behind your left shoulder is your book, which is called Personal Finance in a Public World. Can you tell us a little bit about the book, why you wrote it and kind of what the main themes of the book are?
Yes, it's about how social media, ads, and technology affect our money decisions. And I mentioned a moment ago, but I love technology. And so interestingly enough, let me give a pointer for anyone who ever wants to write a book or has a thought leader in a certain space. The best advice I ever got when writing a book was that it's not about what you know, it's about what you want to know. So in other words, your curiosity is paramount. And so when I sat down to write this book, I thought I was going to dump 12 years of knowledge in the financial industry. I've worked with thousands of families on their finances and helping them work through budgeting, debt, saving, investing, making sure that they're insured and they're protected as much as they can, taxes, estate plan, all of these different financial topics that I thought, by Malcolm Gladwell's 10,000 hour rule, I'm an expert 3 times over in these subjects, right? And I don't say that to brag. I say that actually to take myself off my high horse again, because it really is not about that. What helped writing the book was curiosity and trying to understand how people feel and think about these subjects. And so psychology and technology were 2 vitally important subjects in the book. So if you have 3 subjects, finance, psychology, and technology, I knew the finance stuff, the numbers and the rules, but I had to learn about the other things. And so the book is all about that. It takes what we see as technology that can sometimes be distracting. We had a little conversation offline here about the different platforms that that take so much of our time. Sometimes they get a bad rap because they feed the algorithms and dopamine hits and giving us immediate feedback when we should probably be delaying gratification. But there's a way to use that stuff for good. And that's where the psychology came in. So the book will teach you how to use technology in a positive way so that you have a healthy relationship with your finances.
Awesome. And who would you say you wrote the book for? What kind of people did you write the book for?
Oh, I love this question. So in my previous role, like I said, I worked with thousands of families, and I knew that when we left our company and started our own, we were really going to be changing our business model, and we weren't going to be able to work with as many people. We had a very, very we were a mile wide and an inch deep. I like to say we wanted to be a mile deep with a select few families and an inch wide. So I knew that there's thousands of people out there, more than that actually, that needed to hear this message. And so I was going to write the book for the people that had questions about this that I would just not be able to reach. I mean, I can only take so many phone calls and only meet with so many people during the week. So the book is written for anyone who feels that technology may be taking away from their relationship with money. Technology might be causing them to buy things that they don't need, or they have resources, but they're not managing them well, and they wish they could automate. They feel overwhelmed from a time perspective. Like, how am I supposed to take care of everything in my life, my income, my taxes, my debt, my budget? How am I supposed to handle all these things? The book will teach you how to use technology to really, really simplify your financial life. And then you can spend more time on the stuff that's really meaningful to you. Because very, very few people, there's a few, and I would even argue that they're confused, but maybe 1% of the people that I've worked with over the years has money been the actual goal. It's normally something more than money. It's freedom, it's vacation, it's fancy stuff, it's giving, which we always promote at our firm now. You know, many people want to make a lot of money so they can give it away. It's very rarely I just want to look at the numbers in my bank account.
Yeah. Yeah. When 35-year-old Amanda first scheduled to see me, she'd been suffering for 19 years from severe IBS, diarrhea and fecal incontinence, along with abdominal pain and bloating. Her condition had not only made life uncomfortable for Amanda, but very inconvenient as she had to walk 2 hours to work every day along a route that had public toilets, and she'd never been on holiday as an adult because of her condition. The only advice that several doctors and specialists had given Amanda was to take Imodium, and when she first saw me, she was taking 5 Imodium a day and wasn't getting any better. To help Amanda, I ran tests to find out what foods were right for her metabolic type, to see which foods she was sensitive to, and to assess her gut microbiome. Tests showed that Amanda had several food sensitivities and a parasite infection. Over the coming weeks, I coached Amanda to eat right of her type and to replace the foods she was sensitive to, and a protocol to deal with her parasite infection. And after 3 months, Amanda was IBS-free, and she also reported her skin was much improved and she had lost weight. And she booked a holiday for her and her husband to New York, as they'd never been on a proper honeymoon because of her IBS. And if you're suffering like Amanda was, and you want to get to the root cause of your problem, you can arrange a consultation with me at www.bodycheck.co.uk. And if we're a good fit, I could help you achieve the same kind of results as Amanda. Now, back to the podcast. One of the things you mentioned that's in one of the main topics of the book is psychology. Mm-hmm. Be quite interested to get your thoughts on the importance of having a money mindset.
Very important. Yeah, well, very important to have a good relationship with money, and that's all part of the mindset. So one of the studies I talk about later in the book, and I don't want to be a spoiler here, but there's a few studies, one in particular that talks about how relationships are the most important most important thing in people's lives. And what we may not realize, or what we might fail to realize when understanding that study, is that we have a relationship with everything and everyone in our life. Whether it's the person that you see, in your neighborhood occasionally, you don't have a very deep relationship with them, but you have a relationship with them. Well, a lot of people have this situation with their finances that they have a terrible relationship with them. And there's 2 things that I think of when I think about bad relationships. One is miscommunication. So there's no understanding of the feeling and situation. So those are the type of people that would just prefer not to look at their finances because they just want to avoid it. And that avoidance mentality is troubling. And then the other one is the one where it's a domination relationship. You never want a relationship. We've all probably been in a relationship before where we're either dominating someone or they're dominating us. And it really feels bad, especially to be the person who has no say in anything. And so if you have a relationship with money where money controls you, you're worried about it constantly. You think, you're making purchases on things that you know that you probably shouldn't. You're spending money, you know that maybe you can't afford something, but you buy it anyway. That's an uncomfortable relationship as well. So the psychological aspect of it is about having a healthy relationship with money. And I have a pointer that I'd like to share and how one simple way to help you navigate this. I mean, there's lots of tools, especially in the book, but specifically one that sticks out to me that's been really helpful for people is if you feel like you're in one of these situations where you have a tough relationship with money, and specifically the dominant one, I always recommend this. If you can prioritize things that are really important in your life, maybe one or two luxuries that you really like that actually bring you joy, spend your money on those. Even if you have a tight budget, you're living paycheck to paycheck. Identify those things within reason, so it's not a Lamborghini or a new house or a jet, but it's something that's within reason that you can that's reasonably affordable, that you can consistently spend money on, that brings you joy. And the reason is this. I know it might be counterintuitive. You're spending money if your budget is tight. Why would I be telling you to spend more money? Well, the reason why is if you spend your couple dollars or whatever your currency is on that item that actually makes you happy, all of those other things in your life that are distracting you and you're tempted to buy, you're scrolling through Instagram and you see ads and you're tempted to tap on that, or you go to Amazon and they have the one-click buy. All of that stuff has such less impact on your psyche because you're already happy and satisfied. If you have those one or two things that bring you joy, you don't really care about all those other ads and silly things that are enticing you to buy stuff. So believe it or not, one solution to having a healthier relationship with money and your finances is to actually spend on a couple of those priorities.
Yeah, I get that. And I can experience, I can explain an experience I had that was just like that, actually. Going back a few years, I was in a situation where my business wasn't doing as well as it normally would. And the car I had at the time literally broke down on the motorway. And the recovery came and picked me up, took me all the way back home. I pick up a rental car, and it just so happens I was working the following week 200 miles away from where I live. And the mechanic calls me and I say, Leigh, this engine's finished. It's got about 16 holes in it. That's why you had oil all over the road. And I'm thinking, okay. So I'd already paid for that car. It wasn't like I didn't owe any money on that car. I thought, okay, I've got to get a new car. I don't have a budget at all for the car. What am I going to do? And I thought, well, I have to have a car. Like there's no option. I have to have a car. So whilst I was working away, I was online and I was looking for cars. And this car came up that a few years previous, a friend of mine said to me, if you won the lottery, what car would you have? And I said, well, they've just brought out the brand new 2-litre turbo Mini Cooper S. Right. At the time, I had the 1600 supercharged Mini. But when they brought out the 2-litre turbo, I was like, I want that car. And she said to me, no. You've just won the lottery. You can have any car in the world. You can have, Bugatti Veyron or a Lamborghini. I went, I heard you. I want the 2-litre Mini Cooper S. I'd be ecstatic with that. I don't need anything flashy. That would be my perfect car. So anyway, so I'm away teaching. I'm thinking, oh, money's tight. I've got no budget for this car. What am I going to do? And I'm flicking through online and I see this Mini Cooper S, 2-litre, fully loaded, every extra on it, leather seats, heated seats, everything, right? It's got like £14,000 worth of extras on it. And I just looked at this car and I said, oh, I've got to have this car. Anyway, I was driving this awful rental car. So I've driven it back 200 miles. And on the way home, I pop into this showroom. And the guy says, right, jump in. Let's go for a test drive. And I literally pulled out the drive and I thought, I've got to have this car. This is exactly what I've been wanting for a few years. So I said, right, okay, let's talk numbers. And so he tells me the price and I'm like, oh God. I said, can you do it cheaper? And he's like, I've just put 4 brand new tires on it. It's like £2,000 worth of tires on there. He said, I've just taxed it. You know, he spent loads of money on it. He said, listen, even without that, it's still a bargain. And to be fair, it was a good price. And he said, what can you afford monthly? And I told him, he said, you know, that's not enough. And I said, right, what's the minimum I can pay a month? And he told me, I said, right, I'll do it. I couldn't afford it. I said, right, I'll do it. And I did it and I afforded it. No problem. No problem at all. And one of the things that I always try to get across to my clients about money mindset, because there's a lot of people, when they're faced with a situation, they say, oh, I can't afford it. Therefore, it's not going to happen. And I say to them, rather than think I can't afford it, think, how can I afford it? Could you do a bit of extra work here? Or could you launch a new product? Or could you get a few more clients? Or could you get a better paid job? Because if you don't have that mindset, that mindset where there's abundance rather than scarcity, if your view always is, well, I can't afford it, you're really restricting the level of happiness in your life. So I always try and get people to have that abundant mentality. And you know what? I've still got that car and I still absolutely love it. I've had it quite a few years now. And last year I was due to upgrade it, right? And I was going to get a new one, like the next level up, even more powerful engine. And then I looked at the economy and I just thought, why? Why spend more money? I'm happy with that car and I'm still happy with it. And I wouldn't want to change it. And to be honest, I've never seen another one as fully loaded as that on the market. So why would I downgrade it and pay more for it? I'm happy with what I've got, right? And the other thing I think as well, and, you know, listen, I grew up in the 1970s, right? Now, growing up in the UK in the 1970s was tough. There was not a lot of money around. There was lots of strikes. There was, there was ultra inflation, which we may well be going through now again. You know, we had some days where we had no electricity. You know, we had what we call, blackouts where there would be no electricity for 1, 2, 3 days in a row. And when you grow up in that environment, that creates a vibration within you of scarcity that is at a subconscious level. If you grew up in an environment like that. So, if you grew up in an environment where there wasn't a lot of money around, you've got to break out of that at a subconscious level. And this is where things like, I find things like hypnosis can be really helpful. And one of the other things that I've spoken about briefly in previous podcasts is just affirmation statements, just saying things in a positive way, repetitively creating that vibration of abundance. And I found that amazingly beneficial and effective as well. So I personally think that mindset around money is really important. I've seen it in my own experience and I've seen it in other people's experience as well.
Yeah, that's powerful. And the affirmations and the positivity is important too. It becomes habitual. If you could take that time every day, and even if you feel like you're in a struggling situation, if you can make one minor tweak, just make one little adjustment every day, and you can revel in that and celebrate that, that's a great gratitude practice. Simple habits, and then you'll feel much, much better. When you look back a week, 2 weeks, a month has gone by, and you've made incremental progress, that contributes to the abundance mindset like no other.
So I know obviously giving back is something that's really important to you, but how do you model giving back in your daily life?
Well, the first thing is gratitude. We talked about it. It's making sure that we feel, or I feel, like I have the ability to give back. And I have resources in order to do that. So I always take a couple minutes every morning just to be thankful for the things I have. And based on my previous story that I told you, one of the highest thing on the list is just life itself. I'm just happy to be alive. And if I think like Tim O'Brien, who committed that incredible act of generosity for me and my family, I know that I have an amazing ability to be generous. And I just don't know when the last opportunity I'll have to do that is. So that inspires me to not only believe that I can, but also to actually do it. And so then throughout the day, I just try to be a giving person with my words and my actions to start. And then I have two other things that I like to talk about a lot with groups. I talk with organizations about having a generous culture. And the first thing that I like to talk about is we all love those spontaneous moments of giving, where we get those oxytocin and dopamine hits that we didn't expect, and we had an opportunity to do something for someone. And I definitely encourage people to participate in those as they come up throughout your day and your week and your year. When someone's in need and you can help them in the moment, it's a great feeling. But those are not enough. And the reason why is they don't always develop the habits, because that's a less proactive approach. That's reactionary. And if we can react well, that's good, especially if you're a leader in an organization or a group or your family. It's great to have poise during challenging times and be able to react well. But what's more helpful and sustainable is a proactive approach. So I try to have a plan in my giving. And that's financial too. And that's what I do for a living. I work with people's finances and help them give as much as they can, lessen the tax burden and plan for it. But it's not just with our financial giving that we want to plan as well. It's also with our time. So I'm actively looking for opportunities to volunteer my time and maybe use some of my expertise that I have in my profession and in my personal life, just gifts and skills that maybe I've developed over the years, and offer them to people, offer advice. My wife and I, we don't have any children, but we're heavily active with high school and college age students. We try to pour into them and give back. So we actually plan that time. Happens to be a Wednesday today. This evening, I'll be spending time about an hour and a half with high school students. So it's about having a plan. And I have a calendar, and those items are locked in on my calendar. They are of utmost priority, so nothing else can trump them. So just as a quick rehash, it's take advantage of those spontaneous opportunities, but then also plan it. And it doesn't have to be extravagant. It doesn't have to be, I'm going to spend 7 hours volunteering my time. I'm an attorney, and I'm going to spend 7 hours offering free pro bono legal advice to people, every day. I'm not suggesting that. If you can and you want to do that, excellent. But it's more simpler opportunities, and that's what builds the habits. So my first suggestion would be to simplify and follow those 2 steps.
And to the people listening to this or watching this, what can be some examples of spontaneous examples of giving back?
Sure. Well, spontaneity is a great one. You mentioned it with your story earlier, but I'll give you the cliche examples. It's opening a door for someone that's carrying a bunch of stuff out of the store, or helping someone cross the street if they can't handle it, or maybe it's bringing food to a neighbor who's sick. We had a neighbor, a friend of ours, who lives not too far away, but she was gravely ill for like 4 months, dealing with all kinds of major surgeries and issues. And so we would bring food to the family. And taking it a step further, it's organizing these things. People in need are often not able to organize help. And maybe this is going beyond spontaneity, but I'll share it anyway. So it was spontaneous the first time we brought food over to the person who couldn't cook for themselves, right? It was spontaneous when we went over there and did some yard work for them because they couldn't handle it. But the planned aspect was, okay, she's going to need help for more than just 1 or 2 days. What are we going to do to make sure that continues? And I don't want to take credit for it, but someone else thought of this, and they created a meal chain. And there was I think it was an online document, and people would just sign up. So then for a couple months, every night of the week, they had a meal, and that was organized. And if you think about it, that person who organized that, even if they didn't sign up for one of the nights and give the food, they essentially were responsible for getting this person food for 2 months. So you think about how planning can really help you. So for spontaneity, just keep your eyes open and be a good person. It's look out when someone's in need. But then once you've helped that person in the moment, maybe take that next step and think about what you can do to make it less spontaneous now and make it more consistent for someone who's got a problem.
Yeah, that's really good. And it's interesting because as you were speaking then, I was thinking of Tim O'Brien. And I was thinking that one act of, spontaneous generosity, look how much generosity that's led to.
Yeah. I owe the gentleman a lot. And I've had an opportunity to speak with his kids who were very young at the time, and they were babies or toddlers, and they're all grown up now. And having those conversations with them and really telling them how their dad has really sparked a generation of generosity is really fascinating. What a cool opportunity that was to talk with him. But yeah, he really did. I mean, what he did has given me this motivation for almost a quarter century now, which is kind of crazy.
I mean, it's kind of contagious, isn't it? Generosity is kind of contagious.
Mm-hmm. Use this phrase all the time with people. And I have a friend by the name of Wendy Steele, who's the leader of an organization called Impact 100 Global. You can check them out online. They help communities of women be involved in fundraising and grant writing. And it's a whole system to help you do more than just write a check and learn about causes, fundraising, how to organize nonprofit activities. And she talks about it being contagious, and it's scientific too. This is not just a metaphor. It literally is contagious, because most of us can understand when you receive something, a gift, that it feels good. You kind of get those hormones and they're raging in a good way. It feels good to be supported. And most of us can also understand that it feels good to be the giver. When you give someone something and they smile and say thank you and it helps them, it feels good, like the lady that you were talking about. But what we may miss, and I've been guilty of it for years, but I'm starting to realize it more and more now, is that there's a third party that also receives what we might call a hit of oxytocin. And Wendy talks about this in her TED Talk that's over a decade old now, but it still holds up. You can search Wendy Steele generosity TED Talk, TEDx, and you'll see it. And she talks about oxytocin, which if you're a woman, you may have heard or understand a little bit more about this hormone than us guys do, because it's involved in childbirth and labor and all that. So I don't want to get into that. Most of that's over my head, especially on the health podcast. I would not be able to tell you any tips on childbirth, but what I do know is that oxytocin is involved, and they call it the bonding hormone because, that's where you get the bond between mother and child. You know that it's so strong and you almost can't describe it. Well, the same hormone is involved in generous acts. And the first person, the second person, and the third party onlooking also receives that hit of oxytocin. And think about it. On the internet, it's great now. You can go on, speaking of YouTube, you can go search all kinds of good projects and charitable events, and you'll get a good feeling from it. But also, next time you see it in person, take note of it. Next time you see someone do someone nice, you get that, oh, wow, that's really nice feeling. And that's a hit of oxytocin. You almost have a bond with the people that you're watching do something generous for each other. It's really cool, actually.
Yeah, it's interesting as you were describing that. Just the other day, I saw a video online of a guy saving this little tiny bird that was caught. And you're exactly right. You watch that and it makes you feel better knowing that someone else has helped someone else, or in this instance, an animal. It does make you feel better, and it's always good to watch those videos. It does make you feel good. So Wendy Steele is absolutely right.
Mm-hmm. It's so inspiring. I had her on an episode of my podcast, and I left finished the recording, and my typical routine is to write some notes and make sure that I did a good job of documenting what I might say intro outro for the episode. But I was so inspired, I just wanted to go outside and go help somebody. It was like give me some oxytocin. Where can I find it? It was kind of interesting. But yeah, she's inspiring for sure.
One of the things as well, as you've been speaking today, is that one of the things that's I think is really important to discuss is the fact that you can't give what you don't have.
Mm-hmm.
And again, if you look at, I'm gonna go off a slightly different tangent, but it's completely relevant. If you look at the so-called climate crisis, if you want to call it that, I don't want to get into the politics of it, but when you look at the countries that are polluting the world the most, they are the poorest countries, right? So, particularly China and India. And I'm not blaming the man on the street in China or India, but the thing is that when you're living on the breadline, when you're in survival mode, there is no capacity to help others because all you're trying to do is save yourself, right? So to be in a position to help others, it's much better to be in a position where you're safe and secure yourself. And that for me is another reason why it's important to have a level of security financially, because once you solve your own security issues, it's much easier to help others from that point. And I think it was Henry Ford that said the best thing you can do to help poor people is not become one of them.
Powerful. The thing that comes to mind is, once again, the relationship. I find overwhelmingly the people that have a healthy relationship with their money, they're willing to look at it, right? So going back to the two unhealthy relationships, they're not afraid. It's not an avoidance technique, and they're not dominated by it. They're willing to look at it, even if it may not be great. And, I've had times in my life, absolutely, where the budget's been really, really tight, especially when I talked about making that transition out of the radio business I talked about earlier. It was tough. It was a tough financial move, then starting my own company and taking a big risk as well. But I was comfortable at those points looking at the finances and taking control and not being overwhelmed. And if you are overwhelmed and there's too many things going on, you really have to just handle one thing at a time. There's a couple different debt repayment. I had a gentleman on our podcast as well talk about the different ways to repay debt. And there's different methods. You might have heard of the snowball, the avalanche. You can look them up online if you're having troubles with debt. But the most important thing to consider out of all of those methods, on which should you pay off with the highest interest rate first, or should you pay with the highest balance first, or should you pay the one that you don't like the most, whatever. It doesn't matter. The point is, though, is that you got to tackle at it one at a time. You can't do it all at once. So you do want to be in control of your finances, but there's a possibility that some of you out there listening are not in full control of your finance, and that's okay. But try to control one thing at a time. If you have 5 credit cards, figure one out today. When you hang up, when you're done with this podcast, you got a minute, figure out the interest rate, how much time it's going to take you to pay it off, and what you got to pay. Just that information alone is a step in the right direction. So simplify, handle one thing at a time. Once you figure out all, let's say you have 5 credit cards, it takes you 5 days to figure them all out. On the 6th day, come up with the plan. And then on the 7th day, start implementing the plan. When all the debt's paid off, then think about, okay, now what do I need to do to build up my emergency fund? And I typically recommend in previous years, 3 to 6 months of all your expenses saved up in a safe place. But now with all that's been going on in the world, I tend to lean beyond 6, almost a year in some cases, especially if you're going to start a business like I did a couple of years ago. Have that money saved up. And you're not going to be able to save it all up at once. But if you do a little bit over a period of time, it'll add up. And then you want to get into investing. You're not going to take every last dollar you have and invest it all at once in 15 different companies. Start one at a time. Start learning. And if you move slowly, you're more likely to retain the information. The faster you go, it might seem like you're getting more accomplished, but you're not actually learning it. You're just pushing through as fast as you can. So I always say simpler and slower is better.
Yeah, I like that. One of the things that I did in the past when I had debt, I don't have any debt now. I think at one point I owed money on about 3 different credit cards because I invested so much money in my education as an adult. Again, I was talking about vibration earlier and having that scarcity versus abundant mentality. Well, I felt if I was constantly looking at how much money I owed, that was bringing down my vibration.
Mm.
So what I would do is I would close my eyes and I'd visualize my bank accounts being in the positive, like tens of thousands of pounds. And I would just, almost like an athlete at the start of a race is visualizing how he's going to run that race, right? I was visualizing in my mind having all this money in my bank accounts, even though my bank accounts were overdrawn. I had credit card bills.
Mm-hmm.
I would just visualize my accounts having loads of money in them. And it did create that vibration of abundance. And over a period of a few years, the debts have all gone. And I mean, I'm no millionaire, but I'm doing okay. And I've got pretty much the amounts of money that I was visualizing in my bank account.
I like it. I like that positive practice. And you talked about I always love sports examples. And I think some of the best athletes in the world are known for being extremely confident, but it's not, some might say it's arrogant or unwarranted, but I believe it's because they have that positive mindset. They visualize themselves making a big play. They visualize themselves having success and defeating their opponent. And it makes you believe. It really does. If you practice every day throughout the week, and then on the weekend you have a game, you're much more likely to be confident going into that game. And the same thing, you're visualizing your success with financial success, it will come. Now, I'm not saying you'll never get there if you don't visualize it, but you're a perfect proof right there. That story is great because now it gives you an example that you're much more likely to move it along and learn as you go. If you consider what's possible, and you kind of said it earlier, consider what I have to give, not what I need, right? It's what I have. And in this case, it's what I have and the resources, the abilities I have in my life right now to get there. You didn't visualize yourself owning the world. That's unrealistic. But you visualize yourself not having debt and having a positive flow on your cash. That's absolutely possible. Totally reasonable goal. So why not?
Yeah. And I had no idea how I was going to get there either. But that doesn't matter.
You could, though. You knew you could.
Yeah. Well, yeah. And, if you create the vibration, then the universe, my belief is the universe will show you how to get there. And that's exactly what happened. And it wasn't the way that I thought it would be, but I got there. Right. So yeah, I completely think that, mindset around money is absolutely critical. 42-year-old Chris came to see me whilst training for his first marathon. Initially, Chris wanted manual therapy on his calf muscles, which were taking a pounding from his long runs. I did recommend to Chris several times that he really needed a full exercise, nutrition and lifestyle program so he could complete the marathon in the quickest time and to minimize his likelihood of injury. However, 6 weeks from his first race, Chris suffered a debilitating back injury that meant he was unable to walk and was devastated that all his hard work had gone down the drain. Chris hobbled into my treatment room the next day to see if we could salvage the situation. I suggested to Chris that he do what I recommended all along, and if he did, he'd probably have a 50% chance of completing the marathon. So I've gave Chris a full physical assessment and then devised a comprehensive exercise, nutrition and lifestyle program. And full credit to Chris, he gave it 100%, totally dedicating himself to the program. Days before the race, Chris came to see me for a final tune-up and to ask whether I thought he was ready for the race. I suggested he start the race, but to stop if he felt any back pain, as there will always be other races. I received a text message from Chris the afternoon of the race to say that he completed it in 3 hours 42 minutes and he had no pain and had little to no muscle soreness. Chris has since gone on to run multiple marathons in impressive times. So if you're suffering from back pain that's preventing you from doing something that you love, why not arrange a consultation with me at www.bodycheck.co.uk so I can show you what's causing the problem and how you can get back to performing at your best. Now, back to the podcast. How would you say having a giving mindset has helped your health and wellness?
Well, it makes me realize that what I have is, first of all, the fact that I have life. I always remind myself based on what happened, but the giving mindset, it makes you realize what you do have. I mean, you talked about some of the unhealthiest people in the world. I mean, I had cancer, but I'm healthy now. This lady that I talked about earlier who was having major health troubles, I'm drastically more healthier than she is at the moment. So I have so much to be thankful for. And so the giving mindset makes me realize that if I have to give, that I'm in a pretty darn good place. And that is, there's nothing more valuable to your health than the belief that you're healthy. I know some people that have some pretty rough go of it, but they have a really positive mindset that, they believe they're going to get through it. And some of the darkest times when I was sick is when I didn't have belief. But when I believed it didn't matter how sick or how horrible the chemotherapy was. It's that I believed it. My doctor came in and said, you know what, we're going to get through this. And, you made progress. You did another round of chemo today. That's one more down. You're doing good. So that positive mindset, absolutely important. The giving mindset in your health, because you feel like you have to give. Like you feel like the abundance mindset, when you talk about the vibrations, I mean, it is tremendous. You talk about giving being contagious. If you have those vibrations of positivity and you feel like you're doing well, you're much more likely to help support other people. You kind of mentioned it earlier in the show too. Knowing and believing that you're well makes you that much more in belief that you're capable of helping someone else too. And it's a cycle, right? And I don't really know which comes first. Some might argue you got to feel good to be able to give. But I know a lot of times some of the people that I know are in the worst situations, they give, and as a result, they feel more positive, and they get those positive hormones and responses, and that lifts their spirits, and then they get healthy afterwards. So I don't really know, honestly, what came first, the giving or the healing.
Mm. Yeah, that's the chicken and egg situation, isn't it?
Yes, sir.
I mean, I guess one of the things you've already mentioned really is oxytocin, right? Oxytocin is a feel-good hormone. And by giving, you're releasing oxytocin, or as also Wendy Steele suggested, as you said, even just experiencing someone else giving can also excrete oxytocin as well. So that would definitely be a way in which it improves your health and your wellness, for sure.
I call it an oxytocin party.
Yeah,
those are the drugs that I'm totally okay with people taking. Have a drug party.
Yeah, definitely. So we know that giving back is important to you, Bob, but why is it so important to your business?
Well, first of all, giving back is important to our business because that's what we do. I mean, we're holding ourselves out as so-called experts in the subject. And so if we're providing that service and helping people do it, it is vitally important to what we do. But at the same time, as we're helping other people give, it's also giving us an opportunity to be more giving. And it's really, as we talked about it being contagious, we're just constantly involved with a giving, generous mindset. And it's really, really helpful for us too. It gives me motivation to do the best work I can for other people. And that way, we can be more generous and we can put our money and our time where our mouth is.
Yeah. How do you, I'm just thinking of my own situation here in the UK. There are lots of charities who I would say, I'm trying to think of the right words, they're a bit dubious, let me say. And the majority of the population think they're really good causes. And they give lots of money to these causes. But I know that the end goal that they're supposed to do doesn't happen. Obviously, I have to be careful what I say here, but I guess my question is, how do you know what is a good cause to give to and what isn't?
Well, I want to call on another friend of mine. Her name is Sylvia Brown. She's a descendant of the Brown family that founded Brown University here in the States. And she talks about, there's a couple websites out there like Charity Navigator. You can go online and search, and they give you data and statistics on how to evaluate a charity. I'd always recommend people to take advantage of the technology there and use it and learn. But I think it's more important to get involved. And there's a lot of organizations out there that do great work, and they align really, really well with a lot of people. And there's some on the other end of the spectrum, kind of like you're referencing, that maybe they don't do great work. Maybe they're just really, really good at, garnering donations and they make a lot of money, but maybe they don't use it well. And then there's honestly a whole bunch of them in between. And I think the vast majority of charitable organizations are somewhere in between. A lot of them are trying really hard. Maybe they're not always as effective. It just depends. But I would say this, the number one way to understand and see if an organization is doing the work that you want it to do is to get involved as much as you possibly can. Now, if they're doing work that's overseas, or maybe it's more digital, or it's not a tangible per se, where you can't actually participate that much, then ask to go to the headquarters, ask questions, talk to the business development people and see who else will talk to you. Get involved from a curiosity standpoint. I mentioned about the most important part of writing my book was curiosity. Well, if I feel like my book's going to make an impact, I also should feel like the charitable work that I'm going to do is going to make an impact. Don't just stroke a check and move on. I think those days are over. The new generation of impact makers, and we had Sharna Goldsecker and Michael Moody on before. They wrote a book called Generation Impact. You want to look up that book. It's all about the next generation of wealth inheritors and how they want to make an impact. And I think there's a big misconception these days that the younger generation is lazy or they don't have a desire to help. And I don't think that's actually the case at all. I think they're misguided at times. I think there's definitely a way of thinking about it. But the data shows that the next generation actually wants to be more involved with these causes. They just don't want to, they want to learn about them, though. They want to be involved. And I would always suggest that so that you can determine, does this organization's mission and actual activities, not just what it says on their website, not just their mission and values page, but do they actually participate and do the things that I want to do? Is it aligned with what I think is of primary importance in the world? And that is the greatest way to figure it out. And I guarantee you go participate, you'll find out pretty quickly if you like the vibe of what they're doing. And if you love it, you'll end up giving more money and they'll be super thankful. And if you realize that maybe it doesn't align well, that's okay. Just say, yeah, thanks for the opportunity to participate, answering the questions. I appreciate it. And you move on. You go do it again. And you'll eventually find an organization or multiple organizations. And you know what? God forbid you never find the perfect organization. And here's a challenge. Maybe start your own. Start an organization and doing something that you think is meaningful in the world.
Yeah. I mean, my own view, and I'm not suggesting for 1 second I'm trying to tell people how to think. Mm-hmm. But my own view is if a charity's money, or the majority of the charity's money, ends up in the pocket of a big corporation, I probably wouldn't give money to that charity.
Oh, man, I think we can all agree with that. Now, I don't know about the rules in different places, but that would be wholly illegal. They wouldn't be able to be a registered charity if they were giving it to a for-profit organization.
Well, I would say the two biggest charities in the UK, the money ends up and it doesn't go directly to them, but it ends up
indirectly. Yeah. So let me bring up another one. And my friend Sylvia Brown, you can go to sylviabrownsmartdonors.com, I think is the name of her site. And she's got courses and training all about how to evaluate charities and how to do this right. But there's a misconception out there, and I like to address this one. A lot of people will look directly at, maybe the percentage of donations or income that goes directly to the causes. And that's a very, very misconceiving statistic. Absolutely, you want the vast majority of dollars going to support the cause. Otherwise, why would the charity exist? But there's definitely ways to manipulate the numbers. And also, I want my charities to be run like really good businesses. I want them to treat their people well. I want the benefits. I think that nonprofit employees and people who work in the industry aren't treated well enough. They don't need to make $1 million, but they need to make enough to pay the bills. I know some organizations down by where I work, and the sacrificial mindset of some of the employees is tremendous. But I think they need to be treated better. So just because one charity is giving 90% of its donations directly to solve world hunger, whatever it is, and another one's giving 95, it doesn't mean that the charity giving 95 is a better charity, right? It just means that their budget is different. Maybe the other charity has a better retirement plan for their people so they can work harder. And maybe they have more employees, so they're not overworking their employees and their work is actually better. So in my opinion, that 5% is worth it. But don't want to turn people off, but you just got to be really, really careful. And just like a good corporation, for-profit organization, the ones that are the most successful are the ones that have the best workplace culture, and you want the people to enjoy working there. So make sure that they treat their people well too, because we're all people. We all deserve to be treated well. So whether you're the benefactor of a charity or you're an employee, you're still a human being, in my opinion.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I guess the other thing, and again, I'm not trying to tell people how to think. I guess we live in a world where generally where there's money, there's corruption.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we've seen a lot of that, especially the last 3 years. And it's all coming out of the woodwork at the moment. But and again, I'm most familiar obviously with the UK, but it would seem to me the bigger the charity, the more likely they're going to be corrupt. And I say more likely, I've got quite a lot of evidence that that's true.
Mm-hmm. There's more people, there's more human error, there's more interactions that can go wrong. It's just, the chances of, just like, once again, going back to the for-profit world, the bigger an organization is, the better chances there's going to be some bad apples involved.
Yeah. I mean, one of the charities that I've supported for a long time in the UK is called Happy Days.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a children's charity, and they provide days out for underprivileged and disabled children. Now, it's a relatively small charity, and, it's pretty difficult for the money to go anywhere else. I mean, I suppose, it's always possible, but what I mean is I know that my money's going to be put to proper use. Whereas if I maybe with a big charity, that could just get swallowed up and nothing ever really happens to that money.
Mm-hmm. I could see it. I could see, and it's hard to track. It's hard to know exactly where it's going. We've dealt with some donors over the years who'd like to give some very, very large gifts. Sometimes their charitable bequest upon death, and they try to put restrictions on it. And, the industry's changing a little bit. It's becoming harder and harder to do that, but I understand it. You want to make sure that those dollars are accounted for, especially if you're giving a large donation. And so I hear you with the corruption. I know a lot of for-profit organizations that give a lot of money, but do they really have a purpose there, or is it just for the tax break? Intention really has a lot to do with it as well.
Yeah, yeah. And I guess this is it's a topic that's quite in the news at the moment.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think of? I'm kind of loading this question, but I just want to see what your views are.
Yeah.
What do you think of some of these billionaires that call themselves philanthropists? They set up foundations, give their own foundations donations, and then don't pay any tax on their profits.
I think the word philanthropy is a tough one. A friend of mine, Grant Collins, has a podcast called Basement Philanthropy. Check this one out if you're interested in the subject. But he talks about micro philanthropy. So I'm not dodging the question. I'll get to my answer. But I think we can all be philanthropists in a way. And it's a shame that the term philanthropy or philanthropist has taken on the meaning that you're referring to. And there's definitely some people out there, and they don't have to be, I'm not specifically talking about, Elon Musk and Bill Gates and Jeff Bezos. I'm talking about people who maybe they don't have $100 billion, but they have millions, hundreds of millions, which is an incredible amount of wealth. But they also will do that. And they set up foundation. You don't even have to have that much for it to make sense to set up a private foundation. And the rules, just to get technical on you briefly around private foundations, at least over here in the States, is that you have to distribute a certain percentage of the money, but it's not that much. So yes, you can be donating stuff directly to your private foundation and not never, but severely limit what you're actually giving out and benefiting people with. So yeah, you do really have to be careful for that. And so I would have to, I'm a numbers guy, work in the industry. I'd have to do the analysis myself to pass judgment. But yes, I do know that there's people out there who are giving tremendous sums of money, calling themselves philanthropists, and maybe using that as a business building tool. And I don't believe in that either. At the same time, though, I'd call myself a philanthropist because I don't believe in it's not the volume of money that you give, it's how you give and the time that you give. So I think it's possible to be a philanthropist in a good way, but I definitely hear you. There's people out there who aren't doing it in a good way.
Yeah. And it's interesting because, you might hear someone say, oh, such and such is a really good guy. He gave 100 million to this cause.
Mhm.
But if you look at that as a percentage of their net worth, it's probably a lot less than most of us actually technically give away, so to speak.
Oh yeah, absolutely. The amount, the percentage that you give probably does say a lot about your tolerance and your understanding of finances. Now, someone who gave away $100 million doesn't mean that's the only $100 million they gave away. But if it is, or they're making that out to be some massive sacrifice of their own, and it's really only 1% of what they have, then yeah, maybe it's not too much. Now, at the same time, I bet you the charity would say, well, you know what? At least they gave it to us. So I could play devil's advocate too on that one, but I hear you.
Yeah. But then obviously they also donate money to companies that they own shares in as well. So it's just like it's not a vicious cycle. I don't know what kind of cycle it is, but it's a cycle that seems to be increasing their net worth rather than reducing it.
Yeah. And I mean, let's face it, people who got that type of money, there's some people that get lucky, don't get me wrong, but the vast majority of them know how to make money. And so I can easily see where they get caught up. And this is not an excuse, doesn't make it right, but I can easily see where they get caught up in figuring out other ways to increase their net worth. I mean, that's what they've been doing their whole life. That's what they do. They just try to, that's their thing.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's kind of the current situation. I want to kind of finish up with a future question. So we are living in pretty uncertain times financially, and there's a lot of talk of the end of fiat currencies and introduction of central bank and digital currencies and digital IDs, and obviously we've got things like crypto and Bitcoin, things like that. Do you have any views on perhaps what people could do to, as much as possible, try and secure their future?
I love the digital age. Let me make this absolutely clear. Bitcoin, cryptocurrency, DAOs, NFTs, all that stuff is fascinating to me. However, it's very confusing. There's a lot of details. I've spent a couple of years now really studying it. I'm more than happy to answer questions on it, what I believe, and maybe even some details. If you want to learn the basics, then YouTube is a great resource. But in order to secure your financial future, the stuff that we talked about not too long ago about budgeting and debt repayments and emergency funds, those sort of things, those are the foundations of your financial pyramid. You can't build a pyramid from the top down. So I don't care what you invest in, whether it's Ethereum, Solana, Bitcoin, Dogecoin, you buy a series of NFTs, whatever. None of that stuff should be anywhere near what you're thinking about. So as long as we're in this fiat currency world, until you have your foundations built, make sure you have those basics built. That's going to secure your opportunities in the future. That's going to give you opportunities for other things. Then once those things are settled, maybe, depending on what country you're in and how the system works, but you have the proper insurance and risk management products in place to protect you in case something happens, then you can start taking those next steps. And I would highly encourage people to educate themselves on those things first before investing. There's a chance that we have some kind of digital currency, and someday the U.S. dollar is not the world reserve currency, and we're not on a fiat system. I don't see that happening anytime soon. I think if the past year specifically of volatility has been proof that it's a mainstream investment option. It's an asset class to invest in digital money, but it's not a solution yet. Now, I don't disagree that there are problems. There are issues with the fiat system. I mean, if you're living in the United States, you're feeling some inflation right now all over the world, like you talked about, even over in the UK, you're experiencing. So the system is not perfect by any means. Do not get me wrong on this. But the immediate solution is not digital currency. Now, what digital currency does do for a lot of people in the world right now is give them private access to money, because there's corrupt governments, there's systems, organizations, people that don't have their best interests. So if you live in a country where your money could be taken away immediately, then having some kind of store of value in Bitcoin could be very, very valuable to you. So it does solve that problem for some people. But as far as the problems that we have with our global monetary system, economies, interest rates, central banks like the Federal Reserve here in the United States, it's not fixing that problem right away. It's strictly at this point an investment opportunity. And I'm not going to tell anyone to shy away completely from investing in something that could ultimately increase in value quite a bit here. But we don't know that for sure. So it's strictly an investment and it carries a lot of risk. And I'd be more than happy to talk with people about the risk, consult, look us up. We'd love to talk to you about it. We talk about this stuff all the time. But just as a general rule, right now, we believe that digital currencies are investment options, not solutions to economic or monetary issues.
Okay, I just want to make a point here. So central banking digital currency and cryptocurrencies are completely different, right?
Correct. Yeah. So a central bank digital currency would be them digitizing a currency that the central bank still has authority over. I hesitate to use the word control because they don't control it completely, but just as the Federal Reserve has quite a bit of control over the US dollar and interest rates, that would be the same thing. The central bank would still be able to make their decisions and use open market type of operations to be able to manipulate the currency. A Bitcoin, for example, is completely decentralized. It's scarce. You can't. It's fungible, right? But there's only going to be 21 million of them ever released. So you can't add. There's no central bank that can push out more Bitcoin into the system. It's strictly on the blockchain, and it's controlled by the people or anyone who's making transactions on the blockchain. So yes, central bank digital currency is just a digital version of the current, essentially, of currencies how it is currently. That's a fiat system. A decentralized system is what Bitcoin or some of the other coins are. Now, Bitcoin's the most unique one. It's the original, and it's got, it's probably, in some cases, you might consider it the most primitive, but it means it's also the most pure. So if anything, Bitcoin can teach us a pretty important lesson about the value of decentralized finance and scarcity and inflation or lack thereof. So it's really important to consider those things. But yes, I'm really glad you made that point, Leigh, that central bank digital currencies and currency on the blockchain decentralized is completely different. Notice the words, decentralized, central bank, essentially opposite.
Yeah. Do you feel, because I mean, they've announced in the UK they are going to release, they're calling it the Britcoin, which is basically a central banking digital currency. Do you have, obviously this, you can't know the answer, but obviously you can have an opinion.
Yeah.
Do you feel, if people start investing in crypto that, governments could just turn around and say, sorry, that's illegal. Can't use that. You can only use central banking digital currency. I guess what I'm asking is, how safe is it to start investing in crypto?
Well, I have family that lives in China, and we don't talk about these sort of things, but I follow that economy and system over there pretty well. And I mean, go look at some of the history on what happened there, and miners and people getting involved in Bitcoin and what they, and the rules that their government laid around it, basically making it illegal. So yes, this is going to happen. There are going to be governments that have too much power, or controlling authoritarian governments that are going to disallow it, essentially. And trust me, anyone out there, as much as it's decentralized and as much as you believe that it's completely private, criminals and authoritarianism will get in the way at some point. They'll figure out a way to devalue it. So it's going to happen. Do I believe that's going to happen in the developed world? No. I think it would be foolish for most countries and governments to completely ban it because, you're talking about freedoms. You're talking about people's opportunity. I think they can really benefit from it. I think they could take advantage of some of the things, some of the markets that can be built and the systems that can be created by use of digital currency. Now, that doesn't mean they don't make the central bank digital currency the primary currency, right? Or the only one that can be accepted as a transaction. But it doesn't mean that the other coins can't be used for something else or can't be a store of value, right? They can make the central bank digital currency effectively like what the U.S. dollar could be in the U.S. right now, right? Like that's our currency.
Yeah. Yeah.
But they're not. They would be foolish to say, you know what, we're going to completely ban Bitcoin. It not only would be nearly impossible in a huge country, but it would be foolish, I think, to turn that many people off and limit the opportunity for growth.
Okay, so one more question on this subject.
Okay.
Because it's, as you might imagine, it's something I've been thinking a lot about recently. So let's imagine the fiat currency system collapses, goes away, disappears. Each country's got their own central bank and digital currency, or indeed there's a one world central bank and digital currency.
Mm-hmm.
And, it would seem that part of the reason that so many governments are so interested in this is because it enables governments to control people much easier. And there's been lots of people like Edward Dowd and Catherine Austin Fitts, people like that, who are kind of saying, make sure you've got as much cash as you can, don't leave it in the bank, have some precious metals, gold, get a bit of crypto. What's your kind of view on that?
Well, I'm all about diversity, and I hate to sit the fence, but just in my professional experience, whether Bitcoin was popular yet, central bank digital currencies, none of that was around when I first started my career, or barely was it around. But so regardless of what options are out there, I generally recommend that your portion of your portfolio is invested in most things. Now, that excludes complicated derivative products, tangible property, outside of precious metals maybe, but even those you can get funds that represent the underlying value of it, which I think is sufficient for most people. So my answer would be, I do think people should have a portion of their portfolio once those foundations are met. Now, listen, you got $10 in the bank and you got to pay your bills. I'm not telling you to take 3% and buy Bitcoin. I'm saying once your foundations are met and you're now in the investing stage of your pyramid, I think it's important to have those. Now, everyone's different from a percentage standpoint. So while I can tell you shouldn't have 25% of your money in Bitcoin, I can't tell you the exact percentage because I don't know your risk tolerance. I don't know your time frame. I don't know where you live. I don't know the tax laws. So there's a lot of different variables in there. But I will say most people I would recommend are invested across different asset classes. And as I said earlier, I believe cryptocurrency is an asset class in its own right currently. So I would recommend that people at least look into it, especially if you don't understand it. Because let's say, Leigh, in 5 years, it does take off again, and in 10 years, it's starting to gain traction. You don't want to be behind. You want to at least understand. And one of the best ways to understand something is to have stake in it, right? So I remember when Dogecoin first made its, I don't know if you're familiar with Dogecoin, but you can look it up. It was essentially a joke, and it shot up, and some people made some decent money on Dogecoin, a year and a half, 2 years ago now. And I remember my business partner saying, well, we're going to have to figure out about Dogecoin because people are going to start asking us about it, especially if people are investing and making money or losing money. We're going to get that question. So immediately we had to go into action mode, and she bought some Dogecoin. And I was like, you're going to buy some? And she's like, yeah, I'm going to buy some because that's how I'm going to know more about it. The only way I'm going to force myself to learn is if I buy a couple dollars worth of Dogecoin. She didn't invest a whole bunch of money in it. So I think she said she bought $10 of Dogecoin. And at one point it was worth $25. She made like 2.5%, I think she said, or 250%. But my point is, if nothing else, you're at least going to know, you're at least going to learn about it. So as the world evolves, it's not going to be someday, oh man, I got to get myself a digital wallet. What do I do? You'll at least be able to understand the technology.
Yeah. Yeah. Which is why I've just read a book on Bitcoin.
Yeah, I know it. Read it, learn about it. I mean, there's a chapter in my book about it. So if you want the basics and not, a 50,000 word entire book about it, then you could pick up my book. Or, like I said, the internet is really, really helpful. And then if you go to places like Coinbase and CoinDesk, and there's a couple other sites out there, they're very, very informative. They're really there to educate, and they're very, very helpful. You don't have to buy anything. Just go on there and read a blog. And I talked about simplifying things and doing small steps earlier. That's a great suggestion in this space too. You're not going to learn blockchain in a week. So if you have time to read one article a day or maybe one a week, before you know it, you'll know way more than most people. Just read a few articles, watch a few videos. You'll pick it up pretty quick.
Yeah. Awesome. So, Bob, before we wrap up, is there anything in particular you'd like to add?
Well, I'd say this, you have some great questions about the financial and generosity space, and, maybe some things that people can do. I gave the suggestion about buying one or two things consistently, investing in that bring you joy. I would say this: most people on this earth are incredibly capable of doing something great with what they're already good at. We don't need 15 self-help books and 35 self-development podcasts. And, I had a guy on my podcast by the name of Robert Riopel, and I have to give him credit because he came up with the term shelf-help. And basically, it's a library full of self-help books that we end up reading. And I think there's way too many messages out there in the world today that tell us we're not capable of doing something for other people. And I see this all the time in my professional work when I'm meeting with families, and they have this incredible desire to be generous or retire or buy a business or a boat or go on vacation, whatever it is. They have these desires to do these joyful, fun, fulfilling things. And most of them are incredibly capable of doing it. But because of all the messages in the world that tell us that we're not capable and we need help, we need more stuff, I got to go buy all these resources because I'm not good enough. It's just not true. So if you're out there listening and you want to be better with your finances and you want to be a more generous person, I'm telling you right now, you're absolutely capable of doing it. It's just about defining what is most important to you. Like, what are the things that you really want to do? And you can do that and start small and start working towards that. And don't listen to all the messages out there that tell you you need one more thing to help you do it. I read 7 books a month. I heard someone tell me this the other day. Sorry, I'm going off on a tangent, but this got to me. He's like, I read 7 books a month. And I was thinking to myself, that's great if you can read 7 books a month. I can't read 7 books a month. But I can't imagine if you read 6 books a month or 1 month and you feel like, man, I suck. I need a 7th book. Otherwise, I'm not going to be capable of being good this month. It's just not true. Like, we're capable of it. You don't need more resources. You actually need less resources and more effort.
Yeah, imagine if I was reading 7 books a month, I wouldn't have any time to actually put it into action anyway.
Yeah, I don't even know. Now, I listen to a lot of podcasts. My wife thinks I'm nuts. And I'm actually trying to cut back and take my own advice, because I found it doesn't matter how many notes I take. Like I just said, I don't need that many notes because I'm okay. I'm comfortable saying that I'm capable of being a giving person. And number 2, even if I could, you don't have time to implement all that stuff. There's just not enough time. Put more time towards what's meaningful and taking action on that. And then honestly, here's my sales pitch. That's why people hire us, because we help them figure out what's most important, and then they spend more time on it. We're not special. We're not rocket scientists that are going to completely make you change the world or make you $1 million overnight in Bitcoin. We simply give you the focus and the time to be able to concentrate on what's most meaningful. Forget all the other stuff.
Yeah. I mean, it's not that different from what I do for a living as well, really.
Mm-hmm.
Right. I try and, first of all, help people identify what their dream is and then help them get there. It's a very similar goal. That's a great thing to finish up on, Bob. But what's next for you?
Well, I've been really fired up about this. So the business in a couple of years has started to gain momentum, and we feel like we're at a great point where we have a tremendous service offering. So we know how to articulate that. Hopefully I've done that a little bit here. I haven't really dived into it too much, but now that that's in place and we're in growth mode, so don't get me wrong, it's not like we're not trying to push forward, but now that we have a process, now I'm able to spend a little bit more time communicating with people like yourself and organizations that want to build a generous culture. And all of this stuff we just talked about, to me, as you can tell, I'm passionate about it. It's all good for your personal life, your fulfillment, your mental health, like we talked about earlier. But what some people may not realize, it is also just really good business. All the business owners that I've worked in over the years, the ones that have a generous culture in their organization, are the most successful. Their businesses build quickly, they scale well, and they retain their employees because people want to buy and work for organizations that are generous. So now what's for me is getting on more stages and talking to more companies about how building a generous culture is going to radically grow their company and the generosity aspect of our entire world.
So radical generosity is going to radically grow their business.
Yeah, 100%. I will stand by that. That's what I talk about. And radical is the key word. And radical sometimes is misconstrued in our society. But radical simply means something that other people may not consider a wise thing to do. It doesn't mean bad. It doesn't mean necessarily risky. It just means something that other people may not consider their first reaction. Like Tim O'Brien. How many people would come over to my uncle's house and just give their car to some strangers? Most people wouldn't do that. That was radical. And so if you have that mindset in your business, right? When I used to work in my former firm and I've done some work with some other ones, you never want the people in the cubicles next to each other not wanting to help each other. Like they're in a sales competition, so they're more concerned about stomping on each other to win the prize than to collaborate in the business. And that's just not for long term. Yeah, it can work maybe for a short sales push at the end of the year to try to push a few products out. But the culture of the company, those two people in the cubicles next to each other or in the offices next to each other should be trying to help each other. And if they do radical things, like instead of saying, well, you know what, I'm going to take on this lead because I don't want them to get it, or I'm going to go into their territory, or if the phone rings, I'm going to take that call and not them. If you think differently, if you think ways to collaborate and share opportunities with each other inside the company, the company will grow. And then you as the leader can say, you know what? I just watched these people collaborate, and that's a perfect example. Talk about oxytocin for another pair of employees in your company or another people on your team. So yes, being radically generous will radically grow your company. Your goals that you set don't apply once you apply radical generosity.
Yeah, I like that. And where can people find you online, Bob?
BobDePasquale.com, best place for anything me. You can find all the social links there. And initiateimpact.com is the name of our company. You can check out our website at that URL.
Great. So, Bob, thank you so much for taking your time out to share your wisdom with the Radical Health Rebel listeners and viewers. And to all the Radical Health Rebel tribe, if you know someone who would benefit from watching or hearing this episode, please make sure to share the love and forward it on to them. After all, the mission of this show is to help people lead a more fun-filled, healthy, productive, fulfilling, and happy life. So that's all from me and Bob for this week. But don't forget, you can join me same time, same place next week on the Radical Health Rebel podcast. Thanks for tuning in. Remember to give the show a rating and a review, and I'll see you next time.